He stood on top of the world champagne in his hand, the city lights of New York glittering below him like a carpet of fallen stars. Beside him, his beautiful, ambitious mistress, Chloe, toasted their success, a multi-billion-dollar merger he had bled for. Ethan Hayes believed he was the king of his own creation, a self-made titan of the tech industry. He was about to give a victory speech thanking his mysterious, silent investor, a phantom entity known only as Veritas Capital. But he had no idea that the real architect of his empire wasn't some faceless corporation. She was at home, the woman he'd lied to, the wife he'd dismissed, the one person he thought understood nothing of his world. Amelia Hayes traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the steam warming her face in the quiet solitude of their Upper East Side apartment. The silence in the sprawling, minimalist space was a familiar companion. It was a silence she had cultivated, a fortress built of patience and observation. From the panoramic window she could see the distant glimmer of the Empire State Building, a needle stitching the velvet night sky. Somewhere out there her husband Ethan was celebrating. He'd called an hour ago, his voice a torrent of triumphant energy. "We did it, Amy. We actually did it. Omnicorp signed. The deal is done." She had offered the requisite words of praise. "That's incredible, Ethan. All your hard work paid off." "My hard work." He'd laughed, a sound that had once been warm, but now carried a brittle, self-congratulatory edge. "Our hard work. The team was phenomenal. And Veritas." God, Veritas Capital came through in the 11th hour with that final leverage play. I swear they're ghosts. Brilliant, ruthless ghosts. A small, imperceptible smile touched Amelia's lips. Ghosts. That's what she had intended. Ethan had continued the lie, coming as easily as breathing. "Listen, I have to run. The board and I are taking the team from Omnicorp out for a celebratory dinner. Don't wait up, it'll be a late one. You know how these things are." She knew exactly how these things were. She knew because she had orchestrated the very leverage play he was celebrating. She knew because the stern, unyielding representative of Veritas Capital, a man named Mr. Julian Harrison, had reported to her, not Ethan, just 3 hours earlier, confirming that Omnicorp's final resistance had crumbled. And she knew that the celebratory dinner wasn't with the board. The real board members were at home with their families, having received a tastefully discreet email of thanks from Veritas Capital's office. The real celebration was at the Apex, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a reputation. A table there required a month's notice, unless, of course, you owned a significant stake in the hospitality group that ran it, a detail tucked away in one of Veritas Capital's smaller portfolios. A table for two had been booked under Ethan's name. Amelia's marriage hadn't soured overnight. It had been a slow erosion, worn down by Ethan's burgeoning ambition. When they'd married 10 years ago, he was a brilliant coder with a dream named Aura Innovations, an AI-driven market prediction engine. She was a librarian with a quiet inheritance from her grandmother, Eleanor Vance, a woman who had built a small fortune in real estate by trusting her gut and reading the fine print. Ethan had dismissed her inheritance as a nice cushion, never asking the exact amount. He saw her as gentle, supportive, and endearingly naive about finance, the perfect wife to manage their home while he conquered the world. He never knew that her grandmother had not just left her money, she had left her an education. For years, Amelia had spent her evenings not reading novels, but studying market trends, corporate law, and investment strategies, mentored by her grandmother's own formidable lawyer, Julian Harrison. When Ethan's startup was on the verge of collapse 5 years ago, she didn't offer him her cushion. That would have been a handout, and Ethan's ego would have resented it. Instead, she created a ghost. With Mr. Harrison as her proxy, she formed Veritas Capital. The name a private irony, Veritas Latin for truth. Through Harrison, she anonymously injected the precise capital Ethan needed, but with stringent, expertly crafted conditions that forced him to be smarter, leaner, and more accountable. She guided his path from the shadows, her investment not a gift, but a crucible. She used her knowledge to see opportunities he missed and steer him away from disasters he didn't even know were coming. Aura Innovations didn't just survive, it thrived, becoming a titan. And Ethan believed he had done it all himself, with the backing of a shrewd, unseen benefactor. He thought his wife was at home, arranging flowers and scheduling his dental appointments. And tonight, he was taking his star project manager, a sharp, raven-haired woman named Chloe Summers, to the apex to celebrate their victory. Amelia had seen the signs for months, the lingering scent of a different perfume on his suits, the hushed, late-night phone calls he thought she slept through, the way Chloe's name peppered his work stories with just a little too much familiarity. She took a slow sip of her Earl Grey tea. The betrayal didn't burn with the hot, frantic rage she might have expected. It was a cold, heavy thing, settling deep in her bones. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a profound, fundamental disrespect for who she was. He had built his kingdom on her foundations while seeing her as nothing more than a decorative feature. Tonight, the ghost was about to step into the light. She stood up, the silk of her robe whispering against the marble floor. In her walk-in closet, past the sensible dresses Ethan was accustomed to seeing her in, was a section he had never seen. In it hung a single stunning gown of emerald green silk, purchased for this very occasion. Beside it, a small velvet box. In so lay the original incorporation documents for Veritas Capital. Her truth, her victory. The celebration tonight, she thought, was indeed going to be unforgettable. But it wouldn't be his. Ethan adjusted his tie in the reflection of the elevator's polished brass doors. The suit was a custom Tom Ford, a purchase he'd justified as the uniform of success. Beside him, Chloe Summers looked radiant. Her crimson dress was a bold statement, a slash of color against the muted elegance of the lobby. She looped her arm through his, her touch both a reward and a promise. "I still can't believe it, Ethan," she murmured, her voice a low purr. "Omnicorp. We're going to be legends." "You were instrumental, Chloe," he said, squeezing her hand. "The way you handled their due diligence team, masterful. You saw things my own lawyers missed." It was true. Chloe was sharp, ambitious, and utterly devoted to him. She saw him as a visionary, a genius, and she never hesitated to tell him so. It was an intoxicating contrast to Amelia's quiet, steady support, which in the blinding light of his success had begun to feel more like placid indifference. Amelia would say, "That's wonderful, dear," when he closed a multi-million-dollar deal. Chloe would look at him with breathless awe and say, "How did you even conceive of something so brilliant?" One fed his soul, the other his ego. Lately, his ego was the hungrier of the two. Their affair had started 6 months ago, a predictable slide from late-night work sessions into shared secrets and stolen moments. It felt to Ethan like a partnership of equals. Chloe understood the pressure, the stakes, the complex language of his world when he talked about Series C funding or algorithmic beta testing. Her eyes would light up with genuine understanding, not the polite, vacant nod he got from Amelia. He'd convinced himself it wasn't just a sordid affair. It was a meeting of minds. He was outgrowing his marriage, his quiet domestic life. He needed a queen, not a housekeeper. To us, Chloe whispered as they stepped out of the elevator into the hushed, opulent lobby of the Apex, the new power couple of New York tech. Ethan's smile was wide and genuine. This felt right. This felt earned. The maitre d' led them to the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with an unparalleled view of the Manhattan skyline. A bottle of vintage Dom Perignon was already chilling in a silver bucket beside the table. "Compliments of the management," the maitre d' said, with a deferential bow. "I guess they know who I am," Ethan said to Chloe with a smug wink. She laughed, a sparkling sound that made him feel 10 feet tall. He had no idea the champagne had been pre-selected and paid for by Amelia an hour earlier. As they settled in, Ethan's mind drifted for a moment to Veritas Capital. His mysterious investor was the only unknown variable in his perfect equation. They were brilliant to be sure, but their methods were unnervingly prescient. He remembered a time 2 years ago when he was about to acquire a smaller data analytics firm called Logos Data. It seemed like a perfect fit, a synergistic slam dunk. But a single terse email from Mr. Harrison Veritas's lawyer had stopped him in his tracks. Veritas Capital strongly advises against the Logos acquisition. Re-examine their IP chain of custody. We will not fund this move. Ethan had been furious, feeling micromanaged. He'd almost told them to go to hell. But he'd grudgingly ordered a deeper dive, and his team discovered that the core algorithm of Logos Data was built on stolen code. The acquisition would have buried Aura Innovations in a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit from which it might never have recovered. Veritas had saved him from ruin. How could they have known? It was as if they had a crystal ball. Then there was the time he'd wanted to fire his chief financial officer, a cautious older man named David Chen, whom Ethan found to be overly pessimistic. An even more blunt directive had come from Harrison Mr. Chen Stays. His fiscal conservatism is a necessary counterbalance to your enthusiasm. He is an asset. Consider this non-negotiable. 6 months later, David Chen's cautious models were the only reason Aura had enough cash reserves to weather a sudden market downturn. Ethan had constructed a narrative in his mind. Veritas was probably some retired reclusive tech billionaire, an old wolf who saw a younger version of himself in Ethan and was guiding him with a firm, invisible hand. He felt a deep sense of gratitude towards this phantom mentor. "What are you thinking about?" Chloe asked, placing her hand on his. "You look a million miles away." "Just Veritas," he admitted. "The investor. I owe them everything. I wish I knew who they were. I'd love to thank them in person. Shake their hand. Maybe they'll reveal themselves tonight," Chloe suggested, her eyes gleaming with the champagne's reflection. "Wouldn't that be the ultimate capstone to our victory? For your silent partner to finally show up and toast your success, one can dream," Ethan said, raising his glass. "But they value their anonymity above all else. Still, a toast is in order. To Veritas Capital. Wherever you are, thank you." He clinked his glass against Chloe's, the crystal ringing a clear, high note that seemed to hang in the air. Miles away in her silent apartment, Amelia was slipping on her emerald green dress. The fabric felt cool and smooth against her skin, like armor. She had received a simple text from Mr. Harrison. "They are seated. The stage is set." She looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was not the gentle, unassuming wife Ethan saw. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the clean line of her jaw. Her eyes, usually soft and warm, were clear and focused, holding a depth of resolve Ethan had never bothered to look for. She was not Amelia the librarian or Amy the wife. She was the architect of his success and now the arbiter of his fate. She was Veritas, and it was time for the truth to come out. The first course arrived oysters and caviar, a decadent cliché of celebration. Ethan and Chloe savored every bite their conversation, a giddy mix of future plans and self-congratulation. They spoke of expanding into the European market, of a new headquarters, with his name on the building of a life together that was no longer a secret fantasy, but a tangible, shimmering possibility. "We'll need to handle the Amelia situation delicately," Chloe said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Her tone was one of pragmatic concern, but her eyes held a glint of predatory triumph. A divorce could get messy. "We need to protect the company's image. Your image." I know Ethan sighed the thought of Amelia, a sudden inconvenient cloud in his perfect sky. "She's a good woman. She just doesn't fit into this world. She'll be well taken care of course. I'll make sure the settlement is more than generous." He imagined her reaction, tears, confusion, a quiet acceptance. She wasn't a fighter. It would be sad, but clean. He felt a pang of something not quite guilt, but a nostalgic regret, like remembering a favorite old sweater that no longer fits. He was a different man now. The man Amelia had married wouldn't have recognized the titan sitting in the apex, sipping vintage champagne and plotting the gentle dismissal of his wife. It was during their main course, a perfectly seared Wagyu steak for him, a delicate sea bass for her, that the evening's first anomaly occurred. A distinguished-looking older man in a severe dark suit approached their table. He had silver hair, a ramrod-straight posture, and the kind of piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. "Mr. Hayes," the man said. His voice was gravelly formal. Ethan looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "Yes, my name is Julian Harrison. I am the legal representative for Veritas Capital." Ethan nearly dropped his fork. He shot to his feet, his face breaking into a wide, incredulous grin. "Mr. Harrison. My God, it's an honor. Please join us." "Can we get you a drink?" Mr. Harrison gave Chloe a brief, unreadable glance before returning his gaze to Ethan. "That won't be necessary. I am not here to socialize. I am here on behalf of my client." Chloe, sensing the shift in gravity, put on her most charming smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the man behind the curtain," she said, extending a hand. Harrison looked at her hand for a moment, before giving it a perfunctory, brief shake. "Ms. Summers, I'm familiar with your work." The statement was delivered so neutrally, it was impossible to tell if it was a compliment or an indictment. "My client wanted me to extend their personal congratulations on the Omnicorp merger." Harrison continued his focus back on Ethan. "It was a master stroke. Well, we couldn't have done it without Veritas's support." Ethan stammered, feeling like a student being praised by a revered professor. "Please pass on my deepest gratitude. I've been dying to thank them personally." "That is in fact why I am here," Harrison said, his expression unchanging. "My client believes that on an evening of such significance, anonymity is no longer appropriate. They felt it was time for a more personal acknowledgement of your partnership." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Chloe's eyes were wide with excitement. This was it. The reclusive billionaire was finally going to step out of the shadows. Ethan imagined a Howard Hughes-type figure, a legend of the industry, coming to anoint him as his successor. "They're here," Ethan whispered, scanning the other tables. "They are on their way," Harrison stated. "They asked me to come ahead to ensure everything was in order." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their table, the 2 champagne glasses, the intimate setting, Chloe's hand resting possessively on Ethan's arm. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed the lawyer's face. It might have been disapproval. It might have been pity. "There is one more thing," Harrison said, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced a single slim folder. "My client asked me to give you this. They said you should review it before they arrive. A small addendum to your shareholder agreement, retroactive to the Omnicorp deal." Ethan took the folder, his hands trembling slightly. "An addendum? Now, what is it?" "A morality clause," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tenor. "Standard in many executive-level agreements with privately held companies. It stipulates certain behavioral expectations. It links the CEO's personal conduct to their position and equity stake in the company. My client felt, given the new valuation of the company, that it was a prudent piece of corporate governance to implement." A cold knot began to form in Ethan's stomach. A morality clause. Why now? He opened the folder. The legalese was dense, but the core of it was brutally clear. It gave the majority shareholder, Veritas Capital, the power to divest the CEO of all voting rights and equity in the event of actions that could bring the company into disrepute, including but not limited to financial malfeasance, criminal activity, or gross marital misconduct. He stared at the last 2 words, gross marital misconduct. "This is unusual," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Is it?" Harrison replied, his eyebrow arching almost imperceptibly. "It seems like a straightforward protection of a significant investment. My client values stability, integrity, and loyalty above all else. They believe the character of a company is a direct reflection of the character of its leader." Chloe was now looking at the document over his shoulder, her own confident smile faltering. "This seems awfully personal. All business at its core is personal, Ms. Summers," Harrison said, coolly. Ethan's mind was racing. The timing was too specific. The clause was too pointed. This wasn't a standard corporate governance measure. This was a message. The champagne suddenly tasted sour in his mouth. The spectacular view of the city seemed to mock him. "Who is your client?" Ethan demanded, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Harrison didn't answer. Instead, his gaze lifted towards the entrance of the restaurant. A profound stillness seemed to fall over their corner of the room. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" the lawyer said softly. Ethan turned. Standing at the entrance, poised and serene under the soft lighting, was his wife. Amelia was wearing an emerald green dress that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a dress he had never seen before. She looked regal, powerful, and utterly unfamiliar. And she was walking directly towards them. Time seemed to slow down, stretching into an agonizing, silent tableau. For a moment, Ethan's brain refused to process the scene. It was a bizarre collision of worlds that should never have touched. There was Amelia, his quiet, home-loving wife, gliding through the most exclusive restaurant in New York, as if she owned the place. And there was Chloe, his ambitious, worldly mistress, staring at her with a look of pure, baffled fury. It made no sense. Amelia Ethan said the name coming out as a choked gasp. "What are you doing here? I thought you were at home." Amelia stopped at their table. She didn't look at Chloe. She didn't even spare a glance for the half-eaten, obscenely expensive meal. Her eyes, clear and steady, were fixed solely on him. "Hello, Ethan," she said. Her voice was calm, devoid of the hysteria or tears he might have expected. It was a chilling, level tone he had never heard from her before. "I believe you were expecting my representative. Mr. Harrison, thank you for handling the preliminary introductions." Mr. Harrison gave a slight formal nod. "Mrs. Hayes." The world tilted on its axis. "Mrs. Hayes." He had addressed her. Chloe let out a small, sharp laugh of disbelief. "What is this?" "Some kind of joke," Chloe demanded, looking from Amelia to Ethan. "Did you set this up? Is she following you?" "Be quiet," Ethan hissed, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and rising dread. He looked at Amelia, at her impossible poise, at the steel in her spine. He looked at the folder in his hand. The words, "gross marital misconduct," practically burning through the paper. And he looked at the stone-faced lawyer, Mr. Harrison, who stood beside Amelia, like a sentinel. "I don't understand," Ethan said to his wife, his voice pleading. "Veritas Capital. What does that have to do with you? You..." Amelia finally let her gaze drift to the folder in his hand. "Veritas," she said, the Latin word rolling off her tongue with perfect pronunciation. "It means truth. I thought it was a fitting name. I founded it 5 years ago." The statement hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Ethan felt his knees go weak. He sank back into his seat, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. The anonymous investor, the ghost in the machine, the financial savant who had saved him from ruin and guided him to this monumental victory, was Amelia. The woman who asked him if she should plant petunias or begonias in the window boxes, the woman who clipped recipes from magazines. "You," he whispered the word laced with a deep, insulting incredulity. "But how the money, the strategies? My grandmother didn't just leave me a nice cushion, Ethan. She left me a fortune and, more importantly, an education. She taught me that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful because they are the one who is listening." She gestured towards Mr. Harrison. "Julian was my grandmother's lawyer and my mentor. He executed my vision." Every memory of the past 5 years, replayed in Ethan's mind, now cast in a horrifying new light. The terse emails from Harrison, the uncanny market predictions, the vetoed deals, the insisted-upon hires. It had all been Amelia. She hadn't just been at home, passively supporting him. She had been on the field, directing the entire game, and he had been her star player, completely oblivious that she was the coach, the owner, and the entire league. He felt his towering ego crumble into dust, leaving behind a hollow, humiliated shell. Chloe finally found her voice sharp and venomous. "You're lying. This is insane. Ethan, she's clearly lost her mind. She's cooked up this fantasy to get back at you for..." She stopped, realizing her mistake too late. Amelia turned her gaze to Chloe for the very first time. It was not the look of a scorned wife. It was the look of a CEO assessing a faulty asset. "For you, Miss Summers?" Amelia finished for her, her voice dangerously soft. "Let me be clear. You are not a factor in this. You are a symptom of a deeper problem. My husband's spectacular lack of judgment. An unforeseen operational expense that is about to be written off." She then looked back at Ethan, her expression hardening. "You stand here tonight, celebrating a victory, You think you earned with a woman you think you deserve. But the truth, the veritas, is that you nearly ran Aura Innovations into the ground 3 times. The Logos data acquisition. Your recklessness would have bankrupted us. I stopped it. The market crash of 23. Your CFO, David Chen, the man you wanted to fire, saved us with the conservative cash flow models I insisted he maintain. Even this Omnicorp deal, it almost fell apart last week because you overlooked a key regulatory filing in their German subsidiary. I was the one who caught it. I was the one who instructed Mr. Harrison to anonymously tip off your legal team. Each word was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling the entire edifice of his self-made success story. He wasn't a king. He was a puppet, and he hadn't even seen the strings. "You have built a fantasy, Ethan," she said, her voice resonating with the quiet power he had so foolishly mistaken for meekness. "A fantasy about your own genius, and a fantasy about my ignorance. Tonight, both fantasies end." She reached into her small, elegant clutch and produced a pen. She placed it on the table in front of him, next to the folder containing the morality clause. "The Omnicorp deal has elevated the value of my initial investment by a factor of 100, she said, her voice as crisp and final as the closing of a bank vault. As the 90% equity shareholder in Veritas Capital, which in turn is the majority shareholder of Aura Innovations, I am exercising my rights under the clause you now hold. You have a choice. You can sign that document, which transfers your remaining 10% equity and all your voting rights to me, effective immediately in exchange for a modest severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. Or you can refuse, and Mr. Harrison will be instructed to initiate a hostile takeover and a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, citing the gross misuse of company funds for your extracurricular activities. She gestured vaguely at Chloe and the lavish dinner. The choice is yours, Ethan. The kingdom or the key to the back door. The silence that followed Amelia's ultimatum was absolute. The distant clatter of silverware and the murmur of other diners seemed to come from another universe. In their small, isolated corner of the restaurant, a throne was being abdicated. Ethan stared at the pen. It was a simple, elegant silver pen. It looked like the kind of thing Amelia would use to write thank-you notes. Now it was the instrument of his corporate execution. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, was a fog of denial and rage. "You can't do this." He finally managed his voice a ragged whisper. "Amelia, this is my company, my life's work. I built it." "No, Ethan," she corrected him, her patience wearing thin. "I funded it. I saved it. I guided it. You were its public face. A talented, charismatic, and ultimately deeply flawed CEO who was too blinded by his own reflection to see the architect standing right behind him. Chloe, seeing her future of luxury and power evaporating before her eyes, decided to fight. "You won't get away with this," she spat at Amelia, her voice trembling with fury. "This is coercion. We'll get lawyers. We'll expose you as a manipulative fraud." Mr. Harrison stepped forward slightly, his presence alone a chilling rebuttal. "I would advise against that. Ms. Summers," he said, his tone icy. "Every single transaction, every directive from Veritas Capital is documented immaculately. Every piece of advice Mr. Hayes ignored and every crisis averted by my client's intervention is on record. An attempt to litigate would only result in a very public, very humiliating discovery process for Mr. Hayes. Not to mention your own position as a project manager, who began a relationship with the CEO while benefiting from suspiciously generous stock options and bonuses, would come under intense scrutiny. I assure you, you are the one who would be exposed as a fraud." Chloe's face went pale. The fight drained out of her, replaced by the cold, hard realization that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had hitched her wagon to a man who, it turned out, wasn't even driving. Ethan looked from his wife's unyielding face to Chloe's panicked one. He saw his entire world, the one he had meticulously constructed, fracturing around him. He had not just been unfaithful to his wife. He had been a fool. He had mocked her intelligence, underestimated her capabilities, and patronized the very person who held all the power. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing shame that burned behind his eyes. He thought of the long nights he'd spent at the office, believing he was the only one sacrificing for the company. He now realized that Amelia had been awake too, in her own office at home, fighting battles he never even knew existed. All the times he'd come home exhausted and arrogant, and talked down to her about his day. She had known more than he did. She had listened with a quiet, knowing patience, and he had mistaken it for ignorance. Why he asked the single word, filled with the weight of his shattered reality. Why do it this way? Why not just tell me? A flicker of something sadness, perhaps, crossed Amelia's face. Because I loved you, Ethan. In the beginning, I wanted to help your dream, without wounding your pride. I thought if the company succeeded, we would succeed together. I thought you would see me. But you never did. The more successful you became, the smaller I became in your eyes. You didn't just stop seeing me as a partner. You stopped seeing me at all. She paused, taking a breath. This, she said, gesturing to the scene around them, is not about revenge. It's about consequences. It's about truth. You made your choices. You chose this life, this woman, this celebration built on my foundations, and I am making mine. He looked down at the documents again. Mr. Harrison had discreetly turned the page to the signature line. It was all there. A severance package that amounted to a rounding error on the company's new valuation. A strict non-disclosure agreement that would gag him from ever telling his side of the story. Not that anyone would believe it. He would be erased from the history of Aura Innovations, a footnote in the story of its mysterious founder. With a trembling hand, Ethan picked up the silver pen. It felt impossibly heavy. He looked up at Amelia one last time, searching for any sign of doubt, any crack in her resolve. He found none. He was looking at the face of Veritas Capital, and it was as firm and unyielding as the market itself. He signed his name. The familiar loops and strokes of his signature looked alien on the page, a testament to his own surrender. He had just signed away his kingdom. Mr. Harrison took the folder, reviewed the signature with a practiced eye, and then placed it securely in his briefcase. The transfer will be filed with our corporate counsel at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your access to all company property and accounts will be revoked at that time. A courier will deliver your personal effects from the office to your new residence. I trust you know where to send the bill for this dinner, Mr. Hayes. With that, the lawyer turned and walked away, his job done. Now it was just the three of them. The victorious wife, the deposed king, and the discarded mistress. Amelia looked at Ethan, her expression now holding a trace of weary finality. I will be staying in the apartment. I suggest you find somewhere else to sleep tonight. She then turned her attention to Chloe, who sat frozen, a statue of shattered ambition. Ms. Summers. Amelia said, her voice now completely devoid of emotion. You're fired. Security will meet you at your desk in the morning. Do not cause a scene." Without another word, Amelia Hayes turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She moved through the restaurant with the same serene grace with which she had entered, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The king was dethroned. The ghost had claimed her house. The next morning, the executive floor of Aura Innovations buzzed with a nervous electric energy. Rumors were flying. The Omnicorp deal was a success, but Ethan Hayes, the company's visionary and charismatic leader, was inexplicably absent. His office door was closed, and a stoic security guard stood outside. Then at precisely 9:05 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and Amelia Hayes walked onto the floor, accompanied by Julian Harrison. She was not dressed in the power suits and sharp angles favored by the other female executives. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She carried an air of quiet authority that was more potent than any display of aggression. The hushed whispers fell silent as every head turned towards her. She walked past Ethan's office without a glance and went directly to the main conference room, the one with the sweeping views of Central Park, where the board of directors was already assembled. They had been summoned by Mr. Harrison for an emergency meeting at 8 a.m., and they sat around the polished mahogany table with expressions of grim confusion. Among them was David Chen, the cautious CFO Ethan had once tried to fire. As Amelia entered, David's eyes widened slightly in recognition. He had spoken to the enigmatic head of Veritas Capital via conference call several times, always a digitally altered voice, but her strategic questions, her insightful grasp of the numbers. He remembered the mind behind the voice. "Good morning, everyone," Amelia said, taking the seat at the head of the table, Ethan's seat. Mr. Harrison took the place to her right, opening his briefcase. "For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Amelia Hayes. Though for the past 5 years, you have known me as the principal and founder of your majority shareholder, Veritas Capital." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Jaws dropped. These were titans of industry venture capitalists and seasoned executives. They were not easily surprised, but this was a plot twist none of them could have conceived. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Amelia continued, her voice steady and clear. "Veritas Capital has acquired Ethan Hayes' remaining shares and voting rights in Aura Innovations. Mr. Hayes has stepped down as CEO effective immediately for personal reasons." She let that sink in. She knew what they were thinking. They were looking at a woman they assumed was just the wife, wondering if this was some messy divorce proceeding spilling into the boardroom. She had to command their respect, and she had to do it quickly. "I know what you're thinking," she said, addressing the unspoken skepticism head-on. "You are wondering who I am and what I know about this company. The truth is, I know everything about it." "David," she said, turning to the CFO. "In Q2 of 2023, you advised against opening a new R&D facility in Austin due to market volatility. Ethan wanted to override you. Why didn't he?" David Chen blinked, stunned. "Veritas Capital issued a directive. You backed my play. It saved us nearly $80 million in operating losses that year." "Exactly." She then turned to the head of technology. "Sarah, when our main algorithm was producing ghost signals last year, it was a single line of corrupted legacy code that everyone missed. The anonymous tip that told your team to look in the Wharton subroutine, Module 4, line 218. That came from me. I was beta testing the platform from my home computer." One by one, she went around the room, citing specific secret details, a vetoed marketing campaign, a key hire in the London office, a clause in a vendor contract that saved the company from a lawsuit. She laid bare the invisible architecture of her influence, proving that she hadn't just been a silent partner. She had been the company's guardian angel, its most rigorous critic, and its true strategist. By the time she finished, the skepticism in the room had been replaced by a stunned, burgeoning respect. They weren't looking at the CEO's wife anymore. They were looking at the mastermind they had only ever known as Veritas. Ethan Hayes was a brilliant innovator and an inspiring frontman. Amelia stated her tone measured and professional, but his appetite for risk began to outweigh his strategic foresight. The company needs a new direction, one of stability, sustainable growth, and integrity. She laid out her vision for the next 5 years, not with flashy promises, but with calm, data-driven projections and a clear, pragmatic roadmap. She spoke their language fluently, not because she had memorized a speech, but because she had been living and breathing this data for years. "My first act as CEO," she announced, "is to promote David Chen to Chief Operating Officer. His prudence is exactly what this company needs in its next phase." David looked up, his face a mask of astonishment and gratitude. "The rest of you have a choice," Amelia said, her gaze sweeping across the board members. "We are entering a new era for Aura Innovations. It will be an era of truth and transparency. I need partners who are committed to that vision. If you are not, I will accept your resignations by the end of the day." No one moved. No one spoke. In the space of 30 minutes, Amelia Hayes had dismantled the old regime and established a new one, not through force, but through undeniable competence. The ghost had taken the throne. Meanwhile, Chloe Summers was experiencing a very different. When she tried to use her keycard to access the executive floor, it beeped red. Denied. A moment later, 2 security guards approached her. "Ms. Summers, we've been asked to escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings," the guard said, his voice polite but firm. Humiliation washed over her as she was escorted past her former colleagues, their eyes a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Her career, which she had thought was on a meteoric rise, had just crashed and burned. She was no longer the CEO's confidant. She was just another office scandal, a cautionary tale. As she packed her things into a cardboard box, she knew that Amelia hadn't just fired her. She had erased her. 6 months passed, but in the fast-paced world of New York tech, it felt like a lifetime. The initial shockwave of Ethan Hayes' abrupt departure had long since dissipated, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered by its force. The story, as the public and the industry understood it, was a polished, corporate-approved narrative. The brilliant but mercurial founder had stepped away due to burnout, following the triumphant Omnicorp merger, selling his shares to his intensely private ex-wife, who in a stunning twist was revealed to be the financial genius behind the enigmatic Veritas Capital. This version was clean, simple, and devoid of the raw, brutal truth of that night at the Apex. The real story remained locked behind the ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Ethan had signed a secret, shared only by the 3 people whose lives it had shattered and remade. Ethan Hayes had vanished from the world he once dominated. He took his severance, a sum that felt insulting when compared to the company's new valuation, and moved to a modest apartment in San Jose, hoping the proximity to Silicon Valley would allow him to reincarnate his past glory. But the magic was gone. He was a name, but a tarnished one, trailed by whispers of instability. He tried to get funding for a new venture, but without the invisible hand of Veritas to vet his ideas and curb his excesses, his pitches felt hollow, his genius revealed to be more performance than substance. Venture capitalists who had once courted him now gave him polite dismissals. He was a ghost of a different kind, a man haunted not by what he had done, but by the empire he had so carelessly lost. One afternoon, sitting in a sterile coffee shop after another failed meeting, he saw her face staring back at him from the cover of Forbes. The headline read, "The Silent Architect: How Amelia Hayes Built a billion-dollar titan from the shadows." The article lauded her quiet, data-driven leadership, her strategic foresight, her unshakable integrity. It painted him as the charismatic front man she had brilliantly utilized in the company's early stages. He wasn't the king. He was the opening act. The bitter irony was a poison he would have to swallow for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, at the Aura Innovations headquarters, the empire was not just surviving. It was entering a golden age. Amelia's leadership was the antithesis of Ethan's. Where he had been a whirlwind of charisma, top-down directives and gut feelings, she was a center of calm, collaborative gravity. Her reign began not with a bang, but with a quiet, deliberate restructuring of the company's very soul. On her first official day as CEO, she didn't sequester herself in Ethan's old office. Instead, she called an all-hands meeting in the company's largest common area. As she walked to the podium, a nervous silence fell over the hundreds of employees. They saw the woman from the society pages, the ex-wife, and they were filled with uncertainty. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and steady, amplified slightly by the microphone. It carried no trace of the drama that had brought her there. "My name is Amelia Hayes. I know there are many questions and concerns, and I will do my best to address them. Most of you knew my predecessor, Ethan Hayes, as the face and founder of this company, and he was. His vision is the bedrock upon which we are all standing. It was a masterful opening, acknowledging Ethan's contribution, disarming his loyalists. But a bedrock is only a beginning. A foundation must be built upon with integrity, stability, and a shared sense of purpose. For the past 5 years, as Veritas Capital, my purpose was to ensure this company's survival and growth from a distance. Now my purpose is to lead us into our future from right here among you." She then laid out her vision. It wasn't filled with buzzwords or promises of disruption. It was a clear, pragmatic plan for sustainable growth, for strengthening their core products, and for fostering a culture of intellectual honesty. "Your ideas matter," she said, making eye contact with people in the crowd. "Your concerns will be heard. Your contributions will be valued based on merit, not on volume. The era of the rock star is over. We are going to be an orchestra." The speech was met with tentative, then growing applause. But Amelia knew that words were easy. The true test would be in her actions. Her first challenge was Marcus Thorne, the vice president of marketing, and one of Ethan's oldest friends and staunchest allies. He requested a meeting, and his demeanor when he entered her office was visibly hostile. Amelia, he began foregoing the formality of her new title. "I'll be direct. I don't think you know what you're doing. Ethan lived and breathed this company. You can't just step into his shoes." Amelia gestured for him to sit. She didn't rise to the bait. "You're right, Marcus. I can't step into his shoes. I'm not him. For example, Ethan was about to approve your Quantum Leap campaign for the European launch. He loved the slogan and the flashy visuals." Marcus straightened up defensively. "It's a brilliant campaign. It pulls off the charts for brand recognition." "It does," Amelia agreed softly. "But I spent last night reviewing the primary data from our German focus groups. While the brand recognition is high, the purchase intent metrics are 30% below our target threshold. They see the ads as arrogant, another loud American tech firm telling them what they need. It's the wrong message for that market. She slid a tablet across the desk. It was open to a page of complex analytics with the specific data points she'd mentioned highlighted. I also took the liberty of looking at the proposal from your junior strategist, a woman named Lena Petrova. Her Smarter Partnership campaign. You rejected it. It's quieter, focused on integration with local businesses and data privacy, the two biggest concerns for German enterprise clients. It polls lower on brand recognition, but its purchase intent score among our key demographic is 50% higher than your campaign. That's the campaign we're going with. I'd like you to personally mentor Ms. Petrova and oversee its launch. Marcus stared at the tablet, his face paling. She hadn't just disagreed with his strategy. She had dissected it with a level of data-driven precision he hadn't even bothered to apply. She knew his team, his proposals, and the junior employee he had dismissed better than he did. He looked up at her, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing Ethan's wife. He was seeing the CEO. "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words coming out with a newfound grudging respect. "I'll get right on it." Her next test was external. Alistair Finch, the formidable silver-haired CEO of Omnicorp, demanded an in-person meeting in his own towering skyscraper. He had brokered the deal with Ethan man-to-man, and he was deeply unsettled by the change in leadership. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his voice a low growl. "I made a deal with a shark. Now I find myself in business with his goldfish. Convince me I shouldn't be concerned." Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Finch, you made a deal with the shark's publicist. The shark was in the tank the entire time. I am the shark." She opened her briefcase and laid out a single, concise report. "This is the integration plan Ethan presented to you. It's optimistic, aggressive, and projects a 20% growth in shared revenue in the first year. It's why I signed," Finch said. "I know. It's also deeply flawed," Amelia countered. "It doesn't properly account for the server migration costs or the new EU privacy directives. His projections were based on charisma. Mine are based on math." She laid a second report beside the first. "This is my revised integration plan. It's less flashy. It projects a more realistic 14% growth in the first year. However, it also identifies 3 redundant operational sectors that can be consolidated, saving our combined companies nearly $200 million in the first 18 months, a savings Ethan's plan completely missed. My plan delivers a more profitable, stable, and secure long-term partnership. So, Mr. Finch, which do you prefer? The promise of a steak or the delivery of a feast?" Alistair Finch was silent for a full minute, studying the 2 reports. He then leaned back in his chair, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his tone transformed, "it seems Omnicorp has made an even better investment than I thought. Welcome aboard." Amelia's victory was not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small, competent decisions. She replaced the ostentatious lobby sculpture Ethan had commissioned with a scholarship fund for young women in STEM. She implemented a transparent bonus structure based on company performance, ending the culture of favoritism. She was a constant presence, not in the spotlight, but in the data streams and strategy sessions, a quiet, formidable force guiding the company she had built from the shadows into the light. One evening, nearly a year after she had taken the throne, she stood in her office looking out at the same glittering skyline. The city lights no longer felt like a backdrop for someone else's triumph. They were a reflection of her own quiet, unshakable success. The kingdom was hers not by marriage or by chance, but by undeniable merit. She had not set out to destroy her husband. She had set out to build a dream. He had simply been a flawed component in a design that was destined for greatness. The empire was secure, and its architect was finally at peace, ready to design the future. In the end, this wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about value. The value we see in others, and the value we fail to recognize in ourselves. Ethan Hayes made the fatal mistake of confusing quietness for weakness and support for subservience. He saw his wife as a part of his life's background, never realizing she was the one who had designed the entire set. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It plans, it builds, and it waits for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. What would you have done in Amelia's position? Was her meticulously planned takedown a masterstroke of justice or a cold act of revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, intelligence, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who would appreciate a story where the underestimated finally get their due. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story that makes you think. Thank you for listening.